Welcome to the webinar for Setting Boundaries That Stick. I'm going to pop on the video here real quick so you can see my face. Hello. So I am Shelley Hillesheim, founder of A Nourished Life, and my mission is to empower women in every which way possible around making themselves a priority so that they can get access to the life that they really want to experience. And I am all about how-tos and tools and resources and finding ways to really be incredibly helpful in that space besides just, hey, why don't we just change our mind about these things? I like to actually bring significant tools so that you can really make the shifts that you want to make. And to me, there is nothing more powerful than a resourced woman. So I want to provide you with an incredible resource today in this formula that we're going to learn about setting boundaries that stick. It's kind of a mad-lib style formula. So before I kick into that, I just want to give you a heads up about some housekeeping on the webinar. So in order to chat with us, there is a chat box that should be on the right part of your screen if you mouse over there. And you can just write your message where the little word bubble is at the bottom, and we will keep a scroll of what you guys are talking about and questions that you have. And feel free, anytime you have a question as we're talking and presenting the material today, to just pop a question in that chat box so that it's sitting there waiting and ready for you. For us, actually, when we get to the Q&A section. So I'll be sharing those with our special guest expert when we get to that part of the presentation. So a little background about why I'm doing this today is that I am always a student of my own work in self-care and making ourselves a priority and practicing different things and different concepts and ideas. And I just happened to complete a 20+ hour, 6-week women's self-defense course that really made a huge impact on my life. I originally signed up for it mostly to see if I could pick up some tools to help my kids with some things, especially my daughter, around just protecting ourselves. And I ended up coming out with an entirely new perspective on what it means for women to protect and care for themselves in all ways, physical, emotional, psychological, all ways. This program really touched on all aspects of that. So it was incredibly profound. So now not only could I take care of myself physically, if some confrontation should come my way ever in my life, I feel very, very confident in that aspect and really managing my adrenaline in those situations. I also learned how to be really powerful about checking in with my awareness and my intuition and using my voice in addition to any physical aspects to keep myself safe physically and emotionally. And that piece of it really feels aligned with my message around self-care and making ourselves a priority so that we can show up in the rest of our lives more complete and truly able to be present in our worlds. So in that class, one of probably the most profound thing that I learned, everything was amazing, but there was something about this boundary setting formula that our expert is going to teach us that shifted so many things. And I could not wait to share it with my tribe and my women and the people that follow my work. And I originally thought, I'm just going to hop on to webinar and teach what I learned. And I thought, well, heck, let me just get the expert on with me and have her do it instead. She is phenomenal. I cannot wait to introduce you to her. She is the founder of that self-defense program I was just telling you that I attended, and it's called Impact Personal Safety of Colorado. And I asked her to join us. Her name is Amelia Dorn, and this woman is just a badass. So I'm going to introduce you to Amelia right now. Hello, Amelia.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for having me, Shelley. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for agreeing to do this and sharing your gifts with the world, because it really is magical what you're about to teach us and life-changing. So tell us more about just who you are and what you do in the world. I want to hear a little bit more about that story.
Sure. Well, I was introduced to full force self-defense at the age of 17. And at that time, I was doing a lot of self-defense, continued to do it because it was something I was good at. And it felt empowering, it felt exciting. And it was one of the only places in the world where, as an opinionated, strong woman, I was celebrated. And so that's why that work was very meaningful for me. But then I had 2 daughters, and the work became even more personal for me. And my agenda became about creating a world where my daughters could be as opinionated and have as good of boundaries as I had, but not in a vacuum, where there was actually a place that welcomed that. And so I brought the program here to Colorado and have spent the last 10-ish years building it as a nonprofit so that we can teach our empowered family programs. We also teach men and teens, and we teach in the correctional facilities. We teach juvenile and adult offenders as well. And we're just looking to spread empowerment as much as we can.
I love that message. And I remember you sharing, if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about this too, because I thought this was kind of a cool thing to know, is, you know, like even my husband, when I told him that I was taking this class, he's like, oh, what are you gonna walk around thinking you're like all badass all the time? You know, I'm like, actually, it's totally the opposite. There's just something about having this knowledge and this confidence that sort of gives you this calming effect. Like I can take care of things if I need to, but I remember you sharing that in your own story, like it just really calmed you down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Centered.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so opinionated that when my parents got divorced when I was a teenager, I just let my anger out in ways that really hurt my relationship, especially with my dad. And when he would try to set boundaries with me around discipline or what the rules were at his house, they were different than my mom's. And I would respond with this sort of default way of, you know, just unleashing my anger because I knew that it would shut him up. And taking that class and knowing that I had the physical skills to back up any boundary that I would ever set, suddenly I could calm down. Suddenly I could handle being in trouble with my dad. Suddenly I could handle relationships when there were issues at play. And I think that that's the great paradox of this work, is that we're utilizing self-defense, we're utilizing teaching full force techniques, physical techniques, in order to empower our students to ask for a raise at work, to be able to tell a parent that they're taking their, you know, where their kid's going to spend the night, asking them, do you have guns in your house? I have some concerns about that, or some questions about that. Suddenly those conversations become easier. It's a very interesting side effect, but it is one that I have consistently seen in all 24 years of the time that I've done this work.
Yeah, I just loved that message, because I'm like, no, it actually just gives you this resource of confidence that stills all of the anxiety, all of that stuff that might be stirring around in there, and you just know that you've got power tools to use. So I just love that. Yeah. So let's dive right in then to your mad-lib style boundary setting formula. But before I present them with the formula itself, just give us some background on what you think of as boundaries and what boundaries mean in our lives, and then just flag me when you're ready, and I'll put up the formula for them.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, so the Webster's Dictionary definition of boundaries is that they are a line that marks or fixes a limit. But there's so much more than that, especially when we talk about interpersonal boundaries. They're not just physical distance that you need. Yes, they absolutely include physical elements, how, when, and where you like to be touched, how, when, and where you like to touch other people, how close you want to be to people. But they also encompass mental boundaries. How much information can you handle at any given time? They're emotional. How much of your personal story are you willing to share with someone? How vulnerable are you willing to be? How much risk-taking are you willing to have? How much emotional reciprocity do you want? Do you require that another person puts effort into your relationship? Or do you want them to step back a little bit? And some of those are boundaries that we very consciously choose, and some of them are boundaries that we very subconsciously choose, and they're based on our past experience. Boundaries are taught to us by life experience, but also by the people who help to raise us or serve as our role models. So for instance, if we grow up in a household where if you don't eat fast enough, people start eating off of your plate, then you will have a certain type of boundary. If you have parents who went into your room and read your diary, or I guess nowadays I can say who read your Facebook. I'm not quite there with my kids yet, but we'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But check your phone and your Facebook and all those different things, then you'll have certain types of boundaries. And there's no, if this, then that way with boundaries. Some people have families who don't show a lot of affection, but they may grow up to be very promiscuous in their physical boundaries, not feel like they have a lot of room to set boundaries or to push people away. And boundaries they really only exist in our own brains. And so if we want our boundaries to be respected, if we have boundaries, the only way that anyone will ever know what they are is if we open our mouths and we say what they are.
And just know this by osmosis and figure it out so we don't have to say it out loud.
I mean, we sure live like people should read our minds and know what our boundaries are. But it is the only really sure way to know that someone understands your boundaries. And even if you're really clear and you write them out and you bring out a ruler and you show how close you want someone to be to you, it doesn't mean that they're gonna hear that or respect that or honor that anyway. But the best guarantee is if we set those boundaries ourselves and if we say them out loud, verbally. And because boundaries change from any given moment, they change from moment to moment, from hour to hour. For instance, I love my kids. I really love to cuddle and hold them and be close to them. But we just took a trip on an airplane, and I got to tell you, when I got home, I needed some physical distance from them. Does it mean I don't love them? Does it mean that I think they're horrible people? No, it just means that I had a little monster in my lap for, a 3-hour plane ride, and I was a little bit done with that physical closeness. So it's important that we set those boundaries and that we let people know what they are. Because we at Impact believe that boundaries are not just about pushing people away, but they're also about what brings people into your life. So if you want your needs met, whether they are the things that you want or the things that you don't want, that you need to ask for those. And that people should, you should try to respect other people's boundaries.
Yeah, I loved that message too, even when we were in our class, because it's this formula that you're going to share with us is not only for setting boundaries that create distance, it also is set a boundary to invite people into a deeper experience with you. So it can be used both ways, ladies. Like it's amazing. So Are you ready for me to just put that up on the screen?
Yeah, pop that up. That sounds great.
So I'm going to share our mad-lib boundary setting formula. Here it is. So walk us through, oops, maybe you guys don't see that yet. Hold on. There it is.
All right.
So
awesome.
Walk us through this, Amelia, and let us know what we're supposed to do with these fill in the blanks.
So we call this the magic formula, okay? And this is a formula to use with people that you know and that you care about maintaining a relationship with. If you have someone in your life that you don't want in your life, you can feel free just to let them know that. You don't need to use the magic formula. But what the magic formula does is it uses an I statement, and it uses the kind of language that comes from nonviolent communication. We use a lot of that in building this piece, that will help you to enrich your relationship versus end a relationship. It still could help you end a relationship, and it still could lead to the end of a relationship, whether you want it to or not. But in general, you want to use this formula when you're dealing with people that you want to have a good relationship with, that you want to give them a chance to change something, either give you some more of something or give you less of something. So we start with an I statement, like I said, and it's I feel. And in this first blank, you are going to insert a genuine and specific feeling. Anytime that the word like, I feel like, or I feel that, anytime that the word that or like shows up after the word feel, then you're probably having more of what we refer to as a thought or a judgment. So I feel like you're being rude. I feel that you are disrespectful. Those are more thoughts or judgments. They're not really authentic feelings, but they can help us figure out what the feeling is. So if what you hear yourself saying is, I feel that you are being disrespectful, then take a second and say, all right, how do I feel when I think this person's being disrespectful to me? And we encourage you, and Shelley has a page coming up that has a whole list of a lot of feelings.
Here, I'll do that right now so you guys see it. Like, and these are real feeling words, right?
Yep. Dig deep. Use real feeling words. A lot of our students, male students, we find they have very little access to feeling words. The feelings they're allowed to share are pretty much anger, frustration, and joy. Those are pretty much the only feelings. And women sometimes feel very limited, that the only feelings they can share are discomfort, I feel uncomfortable, or I feel upset. And so, you know, really look at this list or go online and find a list of feelings and keep it handy. Start to build your vocabulary around feelings. So back to the formula. I feel, you're going to insert a specific feeling. So I feel frustrated, we'll say, okay? And then the next piece is when you. Here you're going to describe the triggering behavior. And I'm going to encourage you to work as hard as you can to stick to the facts, okay? Meaning that instead of saying, when you act like a jerk, that's not a very specific description of what someone's doing. Get really specific about what they're doing. I feel frustrated when I try to hold your hand and you push my hand away. That's pretty specific, right? And this is the behavior that's triggering however you're feeling. We at Impact encourage you to avoid the words "you make me feel" because it's disempowering. We want to take ownership of our feelings because sometimes we feel certain ways and it may not have that much to do with what that person is doing in that moment and more to do with the fact that this has happened to you a dozen times before, or the circumstances are difficult for you, or whatever that is. An example of that would be that I am a survivor of severe medical trauma. I have PTSD from that. So anytime I sit in the dentist chair or I put on a medical gown, I feel triggered, I feel anxious. Whenever, so I'll use the formula, whenever I am in a medical situation. And so what helps me calm down, and this is moving to the next piece, is that I need whoever my medical professional is to talk me through what we're going to do before we do it and check with me to see if I have any questions. That can help me feel more calm. Okay, now, does this have much to do with who the medical professional is? No. Sometimes it might depend on whether they're male or female. Interestingly enough, the two women that assaulted me in this medical situation were women. So, you know, sometimes I'm less anxious when I have male medical professionals. But either way, that's how I feel. Doesn't matter whether they're new or old or people I've worked with before. I pretty much always feel anxious in those situations. So the last piece is my request. I need you to, would you please? This is where I put in the desired behavior. This is giving them a plausible solution to help meet my needs. And so this is where I would ask my medical professional, I need you to, or would you please, let me know what you're going to do before you do it, and just check to make sure that you have informed consent. So let me give you another example. This is one of the most popular times that you can use the magic formula. And it is, I feel whole and complete when you are with me. I need you to be with me for the rest of my life. Would you please marry me? So there's an example of a boundary setting formula that is all about building connection, about bringing someone closer to you. A marriage proposal is a wonderful example of a boundary setting conversation. It's a great formula to use around the issue of consent. I feel excited when you touch me, and then you say where and when and how, really specifically. And then you tell them, I need you to do this, and I need you not to do this. It's a great way to help build really powerful conversation around consent. I feel safe when you use a condom. Would you please use a condom? That's another great example of using that around consent.
Awesome. Awesome. I had a little bit of an opportunity to try this. I mean, I've actually been using this a lot since I learned it. And I mean, even with my husband this morning, he has a tendency to want, like, if I'm speaking to him, he'll be looking at the clock, he'll be checking the clock, looking around, his eyes wander everywhere. And I requested, I said, I feel disrespected. you when your eyes are checking the clock and looking all around when I'm trying to converse with you about something? Could you please look me in the eyes when we're having a conversation? As simple as that, because it just doesn't feel good when you think that you're trying to talk to someone and they're just like checked out. It almost seems like they're checked out of what you're saying. So that was like an example this morning that I got to use. So I loved it. And he was like, well, he was of course like, I didn't mean anything by that. I'm like, I know, but I know you didn't. And so that's the other thing that I wanted to talk about with this formula is because I know in class, like sometimes it's not like the other person on the other end of receiving this, I feel when you, would you please, is going to just bend over and do whatever you want. You know what I mean? Like it's not, sometimes they push back. Sometimes they say, well, your feelings aren't valid, or I didn't mean it to be that way, or, whatever. And yet they're still doing it. So how do we handle that? How do we handle those situations?
Well, I like to think that that this is kind of an interview question in a way. It's an opportunity to find out a lot about someone else. When you say to someone, if it's, for instance, let's say that we're initially starting to date someone, okay? And on the second date, I were to say, I feel worried when you ask me to go up to your apartment. I need you to wait until we know each other better before things get physical. Okay? Or I need you to, reassure me that going up to your apartment doesn't mean we're going to have sex. And that person's response is like, it's a gem. It's such wonderful information because it tells you yes or no, whether they're willing to accept your request or not. And that's why I encourage people to, when they put I need you to put that desired behavior, that they shoot for the moon, because this is almost always the beginning of a negotiation. So I feel happy when you hold my hand. I need you to hold my hand all over, wherever we go, all the time. Okay? So shoot for the moon. Then your partner comes back to you and says, well, I feel uncomfortable when you hold my hand when I'm in front of my friends. So could we not hold hands in that circumstance? Okay, well, yeah. And then you could respond with, at the end, I feel really happy when you respond that way to my boundary. And so I need you to know that means a lot to me. So you can turn that into back into the magic formula. If someone were to say, I asked them to wait before we do something sexually, and they say, absolutely not, what is wrong with you? Then that's really great information that tells me that person doesn't respect my boundaries, that person doesn't have a shared value with me. So I believe that boundaries are the access to connection, but they are also the access to the information that you need in order to make the decisions you need to make. So at that moment, the question that I see blaring back at me is, am I willing to have a relationship with someone who does not respect my timeline around sexuality? And then all that's left for me to do is to answer that question, yes or no. And it might not be an exact yes or no. It might be like, well, I'm willing to give this person one more chance or two more chances. But it's a good time to take a minute and breathe and reflect on what is the message that I'm receiving back. Is this workable for me or not? Am I willing to assume that this person is maybe being defensive? Sometimes, very often people will respond defensively when we set boundaries. That can feel hurtful to them. Are you willing to give them a little bit of time to kind of explode and be defensive and think about it, and then maybe come back to you? There will be instances where absolutely that is the what you will choose. I set the same boundary with my mom for 20-something years after my parents got divorced, that I felt torn and conflicted and hurt when she would say negative things about my dad around me. And my request was that she wouldn't do that around me. I continued to get to, her relationship was important enough to me that I was willing to spend all the time I could with her, even though I knew that would happen. And eventually that turned around. And so there are some things that you may be willing to hang in there for and some that you won't. So yeah, I think if that person comes back at you with an absolute no to your boundary, it's a time for you to ask yourself whether that's okay or not.
Yeah, I love that, because one of the other questions that I had for you, and ladies, if you have any questions, now's a good time to start typing them in the chat box so I can feed them over to Amelia. And literally anything that comes to your mind about obstacles that you think you might experience in trying this out, please let us know. Amelia is fantastic at the what if scenarios. Well, what if I tried this and then this happened? What if this and then this? So if you can visualize that and maybe some potential obstacles that you might confront with particular people that you are trying to set boundaries with in your life, give us the what if scenarios so Amelia can check in with you on that, because she's fabulous at giving us tools to push back on that. But
Thanks.
What I was going to say is, I love that you said that it really is about, like, it's information, right? When somebody doesn't respect your boundaries, and yes, there's always complexities in communication and relationship building, and you might need to give them time to blow off steam, because maybe this is the first time you set a boundary with them like this, and it's confusing for them, and they're not sure what to do with that, and they need time to process, and you could come back together and communicate about it. But one of the things I was going to ask you is, because I've actually experienced this in my own life, is being told that your feelings are not valid. So let's say you say this, I feel, whatever the feeling might be, and you go through the formula and they just say, well, you're crazy. You're obviously insane. You obviously have insecurity issues, or whatever might come back in the defensive response, which I have certainly experienced in relationships in the past. Then that's a tough pushback, because then you start to question, like, is it valid? Are my feelings not valid? Am I kind of being wacko about this? Am I not? How would you guide us in that way?
I would absolutely 100% validate your feelings. First of all, is what I would do. We feel the way we feel. And it is based on a lot of really complicated things. I use an example of, I could line 10 people up in a line and bring out a plate of chocolate brownies. And you would think that chocolate brownies would make everybody, and I say make in quotes, make everybody feel one particular way, right? Everybody, well, I think, I know I would be really excited. I really love chocolate. I really love brownies. But if you think about it, one person in that room might feel ashamed because they have some issues around eating, and they feel out of control around that food. You might have someone who's allergic to certain ingredients, who might feel anxious, might feel stressed out or worried. Someone who might feel embarrassed about asking those questions. And you might have someone who, I don't know, but there would be a mix of feelings. Same thing if I lined up 10 different people and I punched them all in the face. They would all feel differently. You would think a punch in the face would have everybody feel the same way, but the truth is it doesn't. Some people would be angry, some people would be sad, some people would feel humiliated. Feelings are complex, and everybody experiences things differently. So I would say, feel the way you feel and stick with that. I mean, the I feel statement is meant to just share how you're feeling, regardless of what the person's intentions were, regardless of what they think you should feel, regardless of what society thinks you should feel. You're feeling that way based on whatever that behavior is. Certainly I know that 1 in 3 of the women that I work with are survivors of trauma in some way, sexual trauma most often. And 1 in 6 of the men that I come into contact with as well are survivors. And so I know that for them, some physical behaviors that might seem, normal to the average person can be difficult for them. Connection and closeness can be difficult for them. And so they may have responses that to other people seem over the top or seem odd. That's, we respond the way we respond based on how we grew up. If we had people who yelled at us, when we were growing up, and that meant the violence was coming soon, we can be very, very flighty around any kind of raised voice. I know that I had a relationship with one particular man who I would tell him, "You're yelling at me," and he would say, "I'm not yelling at you. This isn't yelling at you. You're being crazy." And I would say, "Well, I feel really scared when you raise your voice at all around me." And yeah, I got a lot of pushback about, that my feelings were invalid and I was being ridiculous and all that stuff. And in the end, that was really great information that I was not in a relationship where I was being respected.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so what do you have, like a great comeback one-liner? And I know that this is not, may not be universal, but if somebody does challenge your feelings, I could go into that whole dissertation that we just talked about, like feelings are valid. I feel the way I feel.
Sure.
I could give that whole explanation, but if you're really just trying to make a punch, with your comeback and to, so that you actually feel empowered in your own voice and in your own standing, that I know my feelings are valid. It doesn't matter whether you understand them. It doesn't matter whether you relate to them or that you would feel the same way I do about it. This is how I feel. So have any great, like just a couple of sentences that could really make some impact?
Sure, absolutely. Well, at Impact, our whole goal is to encourage our students to not grab onto those hooks that people send out on the fishing lines that create adrenaline and create confrontation. So if that person is using the invalidation of my feelings as an opportunity to distract from what I've asked for them to do, to distract away from their own embarrassment or whatever it is that's going on, the best thing I can do is not buy into that and let it upset me. I want to model for them that I do think that my feelings matter. Therefore, what I would say, and again, I try not to be too bossy and tell my students what to do, but is to respond with the magic formula again in a very calm way and say, regardless of how you feel, or regardless of what your intentions were when you do that or when you did that, I feel blah, 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 when you blah, 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 and I need you to blah, blah, blah. And to not allow that escalation to happen. I can't control the way other people are going to behave, but I can control the way that I behave. And I stand behind my boundaries enough to know that I can stay calm and just continue to repeat them and allow the information the other person is giving me to remain, hi Kat, to remain information as opposed to some sort of judgment, or allow it to shake me from my boundary. The minute that I start apologizing for it or trying to over defend it, it can show some weakness around my boundary. So I would just recommend just saying it again and again and again and again, and then choosing based on how the other person responds, what your response is going to be.
Awesome. So I do have one question to feed you. She's saying, how do you handle, and this is kind of what you're talking about, but maybe more specific tools here. How do you handle a situation when a loved one continues to overstep your boundaries, even when you have spoken to them about it many times?
Yeah. What might be helpful is if you gave me kind of the breakdown of what the triggering behavior is, if you feel comfortable. That would be helpful, because then I could actually talk you through the whole magic formula. So if you want, you could type that up. But we do get a lot of questions in class about how to deal with family members. I get that that's complicated. I've definitely dealt with students who have family members who abuse them, who are hurtful to them. And in our society, we have this weird sort of expectation. It's part of our rape culture that we need to sort of smooth things over, that we need to relate to family members, even ones who overstep our boundaries. And of course, I don't know what this boundary is that you're trying to set, but I really encourage my students, regardless of who this person is, that you have the power to choose who you have in your life and who you don't. And so even if it's your mom or your sister or your spouse or your whoever, that you get to choose how you're being treated. You get to choose whether you remain in that relationship, and that you decide where your limit is for yourself, that you think about, okay, am I willing to have this relationship with this person if this need is never met? And if you are, then that's okay. And if you aren't, then that's okay too. But family, I see how that really complicates things. I know I had a family member who, as I grew to be an adult woman, he still really loved to pat me on the butt. And it became really inappropriate. And it was very hard for me to deal with. And he was not respecting my boundary. And so I went and told his wife about it. And she set the boundary for me. So sometimes asking for help, eliciting help from others, he's never since patted me on the butt, thank God, is sometimes the way to go. So that might be helpful as well.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you would want to add to what you shared today? That was fantastic information. I hope that everybody found value in that and really encourages them to go practice the formula,
yeah,
see how it shows up, and, you know, rehearse it with a trusted friend. Like we did a lot of that role playing in class, and I can't tell you how helpful that was to hear yourself say it out loud, to practice with someone that is really in your inner circle, that gets it, isn't going to judge you about anything, because this is really about you and practicing what you want to say. So I found that to be incredibly valuable. So I encourage you all to do that. And I hope that you found this to be a useful tool in going forward. And I would love to have you practice this in your own lives. And I'll hang out here in case there's any lingering questions. But did you have anything else that you wanted to add before we close it out?
I would say just that it's never too late to set a boundary. You may have been hugging somebody that you have not wanted to hug, and you could have been doing it for years, decades. It's never too late to set a boundary, and it's okay. There are definitely situations where it's okay to take some responsibility and to say, I didn't bring this up with you before. It's some men that I found don't understand that for women that there's a lot of pressure sometimes for us, very often, for us to really speak up to the men in our lives, and that we value peace sometimes more than we value the care of our own feelings. And so we can wait decades to set boundaries because we have such a high tolerance for our own discomfort and very little tolerance for the discomfort of others. So sometimes sharing that, you know, hey, I know that we've been hugging, you know, for the last 20 years. The truth is that I feel uncomfortable when we hug. And it really may have nothing to do with you, but that's how I feel. And I really need for us not to hug again. And I'm sorry that I didn't bring it up sooner. I was really worried that it would ruin our relationship. But the truth is that now I know that real meaningful relationships are the ones where everybody's honest about what their boundaries are. And that could create a really beautiful opportunity for them to build closeness with you.
Yeah, I love that. Such great advice there towards the end, especially in opening that conversation, because that can actually be the hardest part, I think, about trying these things out is how do I even engage? How do I even begin? And I know we talked in class about a really simple way. I've been meaning to talk to you about something.
Yeah.
That's it.
Exactly.
Freaking hard, you know, and you have to take maybe a hard gulp, you know, before you have that conversation, and maybe have practiced it a few times, but it feels so liberating whenever you just get it out there and say what you need to say.
Yeah. And they're hard. I get that these are hard. And the last thing I would want is for anyone to be on this webinar and think that I'm telling people this is easy and that you should be able to do it. The truth is I still have very hard times setting boundaries around some situations. Being a mother has been one of the most challenging times. I've had to really step in and set some very uncomfortable, very embarrassing, ego, you know, bruising boundaries on behalf of my children. But I don't want them to have as hard of a time as I do. And I want everybody out there to know that you're already doing so much right. And that if I gave you a little nugget that could be helpful, if Shelley and I did, then that's great. So yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thanks, Shelley, so much.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm going to close out with a slide so that people know how to stay in touch with me. Yep. So if you guys have any questions following this, please feel free to reach out to me. If it's not something that I can answer, I will absolutely kick it over to Amelia and we'll get answers for you. My email is on this slide. And I just have some other ways to stay connected. I do have a book called Self-Care 101. And there's some boundary stuff in there too, but it really is a book about how to make yourself a priority without feeling guilty about it, without feeling selfish about it, and without the recurring excuses that show up for why you can't do that. So that is available on Amazon. It launched early this year. And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. And then I also have a private group for women on Facebook called Wildfire Sisterhood Tribe. All you have to do is do a search on Facebook for that group and ask to join, and I will let you in. And it is my safe place that I built for women to be able to come and show up. Yes, it is digital, and yes, we do, occasionally have events and stuff in there as well, but it's an opportunity to say what you need to say, to practice saying things, to have celebrations, to be real, to ask for support, ask for resources, ask for help. And I often will post in there about upcoming events and things that are happening that really are supportive to women around that. I truly believe in sisterhood as one of the keys to our own self-care journey and staying accountable to it. So I have one more question. Let me pop that in here real quick for you, Amelia, and then I'll have you close out with how to stay in touch with you. So this person says, I have a very close friend who tells other people personal, intimate things that I have shared with her. I've spoken to her about it, but she continues to do it. She has been my friend for over 30 years. So I'm assuming that she does no longer want this friend to share her intimate details.
Yeah.
She continues to do it. So what would you say for that?
Thank you very much, by the way, for clarifying what that behavior is and for sharing that. I'm sure a lot of us have issues that are similar to this. The magic formula might sound like this. I feel really hurt, betrayed. I don't know what all your feelings are, but search and figure out what those are when you tell other people intimate things that I've shared with you. And then figure out exactly what you want from them. Do you want them to apologize for doing it in the past? Do you want them to stop doing it in the future? Do you want them to, I don't know what that is, but figure out what that is that you want them to do and give them the opportunity to respond in that way when you're really sharing what your feelings are, unless you've already done that. And if you've already done that, then it might be time for you to look at the information that's in front of you. You have a friend you've had for 30 years who you've given the opportunity to many, many times to stop talking about personal, intimate things. It might be time to stop telling her those things. The other thing I would want to share with you is that something I've learned in my many years, my 41 years on earth, is that I used to think that personal information about me made me vulnerable. And I have learned to allow my inner gushy self to come out and to be proud of who I am as a whole and complex, wounded and surviving courageously person. And to know that even if this person has information that they're sharing about you, that says more about them and their own insecurities and lack of acceptance for themselves than it says about you. So those would be my pieces of advice. I wish that I could coach you right through the whole magic formula and have you practice, but I hope that information helps.
Speaking of that, tell us how we stay in connection with you. Where can we find you, your classes, and stay in connection?
Yeah, so our website is impact-colorado.org. We don't post our public schedule there very often, so the best thing to do is email us via that website or at info@impact-colorado.org and let us know what kind of classes that you're interested in being a part of. We're constantly running programs based on interest, so that's a great way to get a hold of us. We're also on Facebook at Impact Personal Safety of Colorado. So those are the ways to keep in touch.
Awesome. And I remember checking in with you on that too. And you said that if there's like small groups of women or groups of people that want to take private classes, that's an option to consider as well. So
most of the programs that we run are like that. They're programs where we get a group of friends who want to take, or a mother who has a daughter who has friends, and then all the mothers and daughters take the class together, or a group of men who want to take the program. So those are most of the programs we run. Yeah.
Awesome. I love the flexibility. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Amelia, and your expertise and your wisdom.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Working us through this, and I will be in touch if I get any miscellaneous questions after this. So
Great.
Thank you. Thank you for doing what you do.
You're very welcome. Bye.
Everybody for joining us. And
thank you.
I will be sending out this video to everyone too. Bye.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye.